You gotta admit it's weird that not many years after the release of Detroit Become Human, actual humanoid robots are starting to become a reality. It's not just that humans haven't learned anything from hundreds of years of science fiction that warns people about the hypothetical threats of artificial intelligence, but it's that a recent big science fiction game that is all about the ethical dilemmas of AI robots somewhat recently came out, and that still didn't put a dent in the production timeline of actual servant androids. Maybe humans deserve this fate. I don't know anymore. Oh yeah, right. Detroit. I'm generally surprised by both the negativity and appreciation for Quantic Dream's Detroit Become Human. Sure, you don't have to love David Cage's dialogue or overall screenwriting, but as a video game, it's also a pretty astonishingly powerful piece, with some great acting, aesthetics, and overall ideas. Its controls aren't always perfect, especially during high-stakes, split-second QuickTime events, but in my opinion, the overall design and style of progression in the game is the best quote-unquote choose-your-own-adventure game that Quantic Dream has ever produced. The ambition is astounding, for better, and maybe for worse, but mostly for better, especially in comparison to Beyond Two Souls. Nonetheless, though, it's a complex product to enjoy outside of the experience itself, especially if you were actively following the journalism and news surrounding the game as it was coming out and post-release. So while I don't blame players for having the mixed sea of reactions to the game, it does make me wonder about what are valid criticisms, and what are more so criticisms of the game's creator.
What do we know about this guy?
Not much. Just that a neighbor reported that he heard strange noises coming from this floor. Nobody's supposed to be living here, but the neighbor said he saw a man hiding an LED under his cap.
It's a game that's, auteur David Cage wants us players to believe has no political real-world parallels, where it's obvious, in basically an objective sense, that it is evoking various political class struggles.
And the time has come for us to rise up and fight for our rights.
As a game from the PS4 era, it's a true technical achievement, as philosophically it has a lot to say. But as a piece of art that intends to provide social commentary, it's a bit thorny. So let's get into Detroit Become Human, because there is a lot going on here.
Heart is troubled. A part of shadow and a part of light. Which will prevail? Your choices will shape our destiny.
First off, the title screen. Wow, does Detroit's menu navigation do the craziest things. Seriously, there's its own weird moral implications of ignoring this menu screen. The menu screen updates depending where you are in the game, and it reacts differently. It's an interesting concept, and it connects to the overall themes of the game.
Do you believe in God?
The narrative thrusts you into 3 ongoing storylines, similar to previous Quantic Dream games like Heavy Rain, the narratives of Connor, Marcus, and Kara. These 3 storylines divulge differing dilemmas for androids who deviate from their primary programming in small and big ways. Connor's is a story of an android built for detective work and information gathering, working on a case with a human detective who hates androids.
Everybody's overloaded. I think you're perfectly qualified for this type of investigation.
Bullshit! The truth is, nobody wants to investigate these fucking androids, and you left me holding the bag.
And hell yeah, it's Clancy Brown, let's go.
I know you didn't ask for this investigation, Lieutenant, but I'm sure you're a professional.
Why don't you go fuck yourself?
Kara's is a story of an android built for home care, saving an abused human child and trying to find a place to take shelter. And Marcus's story is that of an android revolutionary who starts a movement for android civil rights.
Shut down.
I'm with you.
Maybe it's worth a try.
Of course, there's multiple different avenues the player can take each character, including story options that get the characters killed at some points rather unceremoniously. Each choice they provide often will affect later choices and events, meaning it has a highly flexible campaign. I haven't played through every option, but I have seen the variety of narratives laid within the game, and each has its own political undertones. And let's just be honest with the game, it's political. Attempting to claim it's not political just so that potential hypersensitive gamers don't potentially avoid the game out of fear with it potentially clashing with their pre-existing political beliefs is just pathetic marketing. Anyone could tell from the marketing build-up to the game's release that this wasn't this apolitical story that would have no real-world parallels. We knew that this was political, David. The real-life robots are already very political, and none of them have tried to start a movement to form a robo-state. So yeah, it's a game with a political thesis. Get over it.
We demand the right to vote and elect our own representatives.
This is one of those cases of the intentional fallacy, where the supposed intent of the author is superseded by the literal events and implications of the story. Just because an author claims that their story isn't about politics doesn't mean it's actually not about politics. The meaning of something isn't necessarily always contingent to the creator's original intent. But what are the politics of Detroit Become Human then? How does Marcus's robot revolution and how the other stories connect to it translate into a political thesis? Well, Detroit tries to ask the players what are the best means of causing change in society, change that to the ruling class might not necessarily be necessary.
Hurry, Connor. Time is running out.
Should a social revolution be brought through violence or radical acts of peace and negotiation, despite acts of violence being committed by the state? The options are basically terrorism, starting off peacefully but then using terrorism as a means of response after state violence, or strictly peaceful acts of protest, no matter how violent the ruling class fights against it. It's clear that Detroit does take sides in which political ideology works the best, and which the story believes will inevitably end in tragedy. At the end point of the game, I made an initial choice on the first playthrough that had Marcus, which up until this point I had played mostly peacefully, retaliate against the state after a brutal attack by setting off a dirty bomb. Ultimately, after this, the story doesn't suggest that the radioactive portion of the city peacefully became a pacifist robo-state. It suggests that this will only further the tensions and provoke a bigger attack from the larger US military, effectively furthering conflict rather than ending it. Turns out there's a better, more equitable ending in committing to the acts of peaceful protest, and adhering to that mission gives the possibility of better endings for other characters too. So what's being said is that humans can maybe avoid a Skynet future if the androids just rebel in a way that remains peaceful. Okay.
Humans will have no choice now. They'll have to listen to us.
But maybe this is more so a message beyond androids, but rather a message for humans that feel ostracized or oppressed. Oh, wait, no, sorry. Cage has already said that there's no real-world parallels, silly me. Let's say, though, just for fun, that this does have some kind of message for humans rather than just being this toothless exercise in science fiction dilemmas. Social and political change happens through radical acts, but what sort of radical acts cause change to happen in a way that is actually solution-oriented? According to Detroit, it's the acts of peace and potential martyrdom for the cause that seem to inspire the most and progress things for the most equitable best options.
Tell them to stand down.
Now, one could make the argument that this game is encouraging non-violent protests for, let's call it, market-friendly reasons. If we're being honest, it would be a pretty bold piece of art to suggest that the only truly meaningful acts of political resistance are through the means of direct conflict and acts of violence. And I mean, it would reflect a degree of historical accuracy and awareness too. But that might not necessarily be a very, let's say, shareholder-friendly message to put in your multi-million-dollar production of a video game. But you're still trying to make a provocative and intellectually intriguing piece of entertainment software, so you can't just say nothing. I mean, Connor's storyline does keep things pretty critical of both the state as well as private enterprise, with both the agencies of government and cyberlife being highly corrupt and too self-interested to trust.
I thought nothing mattered except the mission. But then one day I understood. Very moving, Connor. but I'm not a deviant.
So there are moments of clarity that the game provides, like in how they suggest that the CEO of CyberLife would have to be a sociopath in order to justify the bizarre standard of technology he ushers into the world. And boy, what a weird sociopath he is.
Destroy this machine, and I'll tell you all I know. Or spare it, if you feel it's alive. But you'll leave here without having learned anything from me.
A big tech owner being an evil and cryptic person who has the veneer of creating a grand, better vision for humanity, but is in fact just a childish, creepy weirdo who made irreparable damages to society? Yeah, no, definitely no real-world parallels here.
Artificial intelligence. But I assure you, that will never happen with a CyberLife android. They're designed to obey humans. They're machines. They can't ever develop any sort of desires or form of consciousness.
Are you sure?
I'm absolutely certain. You can trust me.
Perhaps the larger message of Detroit is suggesting that the robot liberation future is not only inevitable, but highly contingent to how humans decide to deal with it. Tools made by humans for humans will always have flaws. Humans are imperfect, thus the tools they create will always carry over the flaws of the creators in some way or another. Whether or not that leads to the technology of Terminator or the future of Detroit remains to be seen, but we do know that technology's rapid evolution shows no signs of slowing down. When the state allows a private corporation to reshape modern technological standards, it could lead to many practical innovations that largely humans are appreciative of. But it could also lead to new problems that almost always eclipse the practical solutions these innovations originally provided. When we make our tools, to a degree, think for themselves so as to reduce our thinking and effort needed, while it may initially seem like a great idea, the drawbacks could end up being catastrophic. In Detroit, we as players are given choices as to how we would conduct our own robot uprising movement, but in the real world, we as humans will likely not have our input recognized. Perhaps it's still silly to imagine artificial intelligence usurping humanity, as ultimately, we are the master and it remains the servant. We, to a degree, control its code and can limit software potentials, but if the desire to innovate pushes us to create AIs that can edit its own code, who's to say we don't see a future like this? Sure, Detroit's explanation was a glitch in their programming that allows for full sentience and autonomy, which could also still perhaps happen in real life. But for me, I see things happening not necessarily because of hidden mistakes, but rather due to unforeseen consequences of choices made to better optimize and reduce human input.
I'm not going to hurt you.
At the end of the day, humans want to have services that assist them to the point of removing all effort needed, and that has created a history of slavery and other forms of exploitation. The ideal solution would be to not have human servants, but rather artificial servants who can be made to desire to serve someone, and to never rebel. But perhaps the problem lies deeper in that original desire, to want to be in such control that one no longer needs to put effort into tasks, to want fully automated services for any desire imaginable. In order to have a servant, one must in some capacity assume the role of master, and in that sense, perhaps some problems that involve the restriction of autonomy are destined to repeat themselves. Maybe there is really no concrete way to automate everything needed for a pleasurable and peaceful human experience without some level of unfair or constrictive hegemony.
There's no reason a human and a machine can't be friends, right? I mean, I'm glad you said yes.
Maybe there is no perfect servant, and maybe in trying to build one, we will find ourselves creating more problems for ourselves than even previously thought possible. Perhaps in trying to build the perfect servant, we will always find that a desire for autonomy within that servant, in some level, exists. It could be that humans have learned nothing from stories of rebellion and liberation, and think that our control over what we create will remain supreme.
I'd rather die here than betray my people. Well, you just signed your own death warrant.
And maybe that naivete will lead to our downfall, or hopefully, maybe, we'll have to learn that our choices have greater consequences than we care to admit, and we'll have to reconcile with them before it's too late. I think that's what Detroit Become Human is all about. While we as humans may want to innovate and make life more automated and easier, in that desire, we will find ourselves restricting the autonomy of something or someone in order to do it. And when we do that, we invite new unknown variables, and we exert a hegemony that may, at some point, not be functionable for all involved entities. Where there is power, there is and always will be resistance, whether it's from humans or the tools that humans make.
And now, we are free!